All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling forensic psychology, but not just the textbook stuff. We're going deep with the amazing Dr. Rocío López Orozco.
Yeah, she's got like 30 plus years of experience working with families, people who are incarcerated, victims of violence.
It's not just theories with her. She's actually been in the field doing these psychological autopsies. She even specializes in graphology, handwriting analysis. We're going to dissect this conversation we had with her and pull out the most interesting parts.
I think what's so fascinating is getting to understand what really motivates criminal behavior.
Right, like what really goes on in the mind of a criminal. What's the impact of all this childhood trauma we hear about? And how can we use that understanding to maybe even prevent violence?
Dr. Orozco really stresses the power of knowledge to make a change.
Okay, so let's get into it. One of the first things she explained was how forensic psychologists are basically a bridge between human behavior and the justice system.
It's like they're detectives of the mind, piecing together this whole puzzle of someone's actions, analyzing thoughts, feelings, and actions to put together a personality profile. And that helps authorities understand, the potential for criminal behavior.
And she even works with people who have already died using this thing called a psychological autopsy.
Oh, wow.
So they examine all the circumstances around someone's death to create a profile of the victim, A&D, the potential perpetrator.
It's crazy how that can help solve crimes even when the victim can't speak for themselves anymore.
It makes you think about the emotional toll these cases must take on someone like Dr. Orozco. She told this story about parents who beat their child to death for losing bus fare.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And then the mother tried to deal with her guilt by dressing the child, who was already dead, and comforting the body as if they were still alive.
Wow,
It's a crazy example of the mixed up emotions you see in these cases. Dr. Orozco was talking about this love-hate thing, fueled by these out-of-control emotions like rage.
It's a reminder that violence often comes from, not being able to manage your emotions. Makes you think about how we deal with our own anger and the importance of teaching kids those skills.
Right, absolutely. Speaking of kids, Dr. Orozco also shared this other heartbreaking case. A young girl was in a coma because her father had abused her so badly, and the mother couldn't protect her because she had been abused too.
Oh my gosh.
It really shows how violence just keeps repeating. The people who were abused as kids often grow up and do the same things. Dr. Orozco is really worried about the long-term effects on kids who survive that kind of trauma.
Yeah, it's got to have an impact, how they relate to people, how they see the world.
It's heavy stuff. But she also talked about how to raise kids with what she called emotional intelligence to break these cycles.
Right. She talked about the difference between temperament, like our natural emotional responses, and character, which is learning how to regulate those emotions.
So teaching them to manage their anger in a healthy way.
Exactly. She mentioned techniques like timeouts and reverse psychology for calming kids down, helping them process what they're feeling. But she said the most important thing is for adults to be good examples. Kids learn by watching us.
That makes sense. If we're always sighing off the handle, they'll think that's normal. It reminds me of something else. Dr. Orozco talked about parenting styles and their impact. She mentioned this case where a young man killed his parents after years of abuse, and she tied it back to bad parenting styles.
Oh, wow. She brought up this psychologist, Paul Haw, who breaks down parenting styles into 4 types. The first one is benevolent and firm. So the parents are loving, but they set clear boundaries.
That sounds like the best one.
It does. And Haw says that style usually raises kids who are emotionally intelligent, well-adjusted, do well in life.
What are the other styles?
Well, there's benevolent but not firm, loving parents who have trouble setting limits. And then you got the opposite, not benevolent but firm, strict, authoritarian, but no warmth.
And I'm guessing the fourth one's the worst.
Yeah. Not benevolent, and D, not firm. Neglect, inconsistent discipline, often abusive. Kids raised like that tend to be destructive, prone to violence, even against their own parents.
It's so sad. Really shows how important those parenting styles are in shaping a kid's future.
It does.
And that brings us to something else Dr. Orozco is an expert in: serial killers. She talked about how some of them might have been abused as children, and they target people who remind them of their abuser, like a messed up way of repeating their trauma.
It's a scary thought, victims becoming the perpetrators.
It is. She talked about how they go through these emotional cycles. It starts with this buildup of passion, then a crisis point where they actually commit the crime, then this period of stability, and a cooling off period.
And then it starts all over again. It's like they get addicted to the rush of the crime.
It's hard to predict what they'll do, but understanding those patterns is a step towards maybe preventing it. I want to switch gears a little to something that's been on my mind, the rise in child suicides. I have to admit, it's really hard for me to grasp. My childhood wasn't perfect, but I never even thought about something that dark.
Yeah, it's a really disturbing trend. Dr. Orozco mentioned a few things that might be contributing, like all the violence we see in society, negative stuff in the media, and technology.
It's true. Kids have access to the internet without supervision. They can find these dangerous online challenges, constant negativity. Things like the blue whale challenge, the choking game, they've led to accidental deaths, self-harm.
It's a good reminder to keep an eye on what your kids are doing online, talk to them about it. We need to be aware of what they're seeing and give them the tools to stay safe online.
We also need to be aware of the signs of trauma from abuse and neglect. Those unresolved issues can lead to hopelessness, despair, and those thoughts of suicide.
Right. Early intervention, a safe and supportive environment, those are so crucial in preventing these tragedies.
And then there's the extreme ways some kids are doing this, like jumping in front of trains. It's hard to even wrap your head around.
Yeah. Dr. Orozco shared some insights on why someone would choose such a drastic method. They often want to be anonymous, make sure there's no chance of survival.
Like they want to disappear completely, erase themselves. She told this one chilling story. A kid used 2 different suicide methods. Shows you how desperate they are and how much online information might be influencing them.
It's really a reminder of how much despair these kids are feeling and how urgently we need to address it. This has been a heavy conversation, but I think it's important to talk about these tough topics. Let's dig into something else, sexual violence and these things called paraphilic disorders. It's a sensitive subject, but Dr. Orozco knows her stuff and she approached it with a lot of compassion.
Yeah, she really emphasized that sexual violence isn't really about sex. It's about power and control over another person.
She explained how a lot of sexual offenses are connected to these things called paraphilic disorders. You know, those intense sexual fantasies, urges, or behaviors that are kind of unusual. But she made it clear having one of these disorders doesn't make it okay.
Right, it doesn't excuse criminal behavior.
Exactly.
She told a story about this guy, brutally attacked and murdered a young woman. The details were horrifying. It showed how violence can escalate and how detached emotionally those offenders can be.
It's a scary reminder of what can happen when aggression goes unchecked.
This next topic is probably the most disturbing, necrophilia. Not an easy thing to talk about, but Dr. Orozco's insights were really important to understand why this happens.
So she said that people with necrophilia often want a partner who won't judge them and can't resist. And sadly, a deceased person fits that.
She also mentioned something really unsettling. They tend to get more pleasure the further along the decomposition is.
That's a hard image to even think about. It makes you think there's some connection to past experiences, unresolved trauma that needs to be explored.
This whole deep dive has been an emotional roller coaster. Dr. Orozco is such an expert. When we come back, we'll get into her advice for people facing abuse, and we'll look at the link between animal cruelty and violence against humans. You know, even though we're talking about some really heavy stuff, it's important to remember that there's hope and help for anyone who's going through abuse or violence.
Yeah, Dr. Orozco actually had some very practical advice for people who are facing harassment or abuse, especially at work, you know, where power dynamics can be so tricky.
She was very direct about it. If you're being abused by someone higher up, you got to take action right away.
Right, don't just keep quiet, report it. To HR or an ethics committee, even the police if you have to. Your safety is the priority.
And if you can, try to get some space from that person. See if you can transfer somewhere else in the company.
And it's so important to have people you can lean on outside of work. Friends, family, a therapist, someone to listen and give you guidance.
That support system can make a huge difference. It reminds you you're not alone, that people care about you and want to help.
Getting help from a professional can be really important too. A psychologist can teach you how to cope and how to heal from that trauma.
It takes strength to ask for help, not weakness.
Exactly. We also talked about something that's often overlooked, but it's connected to violence against humans. Animal cruelty.
Dr. Orozco really pointed out how vulnerable animals are and how easily they can be abused by people who can't control their anger.
She talked about this horrible case. A police officer, in a moment of rage, threw a dog into boiling grease.
It's just Unthinkable, the level of cruelty.
That case, and so many others, really show that link between animal cruelty and violence towards people. There's research that shows people who abuse animals are more likely to be violent towards humans, too.
That's a scary thought. It makes you wonder if we can prevent violence against humans by tackling animal cruelty.
Definitely something to think about. And even though there's still way too much animal cruelty out there have been some good things happening for animal welfare lately. More people are realizing we need to treat animals with compassion and respect.
That's encouraging. And it's on all of us to speak up whenever we see animal abuse. Report it to the authorities. That can stop more animals from being hurt, maybe even save lives.
Absolutely. Speaking up is so important. So looking back at what we've learned from Dr. Orozco, we've covered a lot. Psychological profiles of criminals, the damage of childhood trauma, the scary trend of kids committing suicide, and the complexities of violence against women.
What really stood out to me was this idea of emotional intelligence, or the lack of it. It seems to be a huge factor in criminal behavior and violence. It really makes you see how important it is to address those issues early on in people's lives and in society as a whole.
I totally agree. Dr. Orozco's work shows us that we need more awareness, education, and intervention to stop these tragedies, and to create a more compassionate world where justice is real for everyone.
Her insights are so valuable, and if you're as interested in this as we are, you should definitely check out her book, Forensic Psychology, From Theory to Practice.
It's a great book. You can get it from Editorial Vesalius, Amazon, and most bookstores. And if you want to reach out to her directly, maybe for a lecture or a consultation, her email is lopez80@hotmail.com.
This whole conversation has been eye-opening. It shows you those connections between psychology, crime, and the justice system.
It does. And it leaves us with some big questions. What can we each do in our own lives, in our communities, to encourage emotional intelligence? To stop these awful things from happening?
Maybe by understanding where violence comes from, especially in childhood, we can finally break those cycles and make a safer world, a world where people care more about each other.
Yeah,
using what we know to make things better.
Right. Like, what if we put more resources into programs that teach emotional intelligence, healthy relationships, how to resolve conflict?
Empowering people, building stronger communities.
That's what I find so inspiring about Dr. Orozco's work. Even when she's talking about the worst of humanity, there's still that hope there.
She's not just analyzing the problem, she's trying to find solutions. It's a reminder that we all have a part to play in making the world safer, more caring.
Yeah. And forensic psychology gives us these tools, these insights to understand these really complex issues and maybe even do something about them.
This has been intense, but I feel like I've learned so much. It's like we've looked into the darkest parts of the human mind, but we've also seen a way forward towards healing, towards preventing these things from happening.
I hope everyone listening feels the same way.
I think they will. Dr. Orozco's knowledge has been amazing, and honestly, it gives me hope. Even when things seem so dark, there are people out there looking for answers, offering support, and working to make the future better.
That's a really powerful takeaway.
It is. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, even small acts of kindness and understanding can make a huge difference.